Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, January the 12th, 2026. In this video, I do want to talk about Chiron, and that's shown in the thumbnail, your Chiron rebellion. Now, on the face of it, that might sound a bit absurd, but I do mean that. I mean, Chiron, I would argue, is a rebellious force, a rebellious planet. And on Monday, today, the Sun is square Chiron. On Tuesday, we've got Mars square Chiron. In fact, this whole Capricorn conjunction that we've just been seeing is square Chiron. And how are we going to respond to it? And I do think that rebellion is one way of approaching it. We think about Chiron sometimes as the wounded healer, but I do think that it goes further than that. And so perhaps we all have to work out what Chiron means to us right now. I mean, I do have some particular subjective views on Chiron, and these views are kind of in a process of development, and I will be talking about that later in the video. But before I talk about your Chiron rebellion, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today. So here is the chart for today, set for noon New York time on the 12th of January 2026. So, by the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So, as far as the chart is concerned, the moon is in Scorpio. So, moon is at 14:55 or something like that, Scorpio at noon New York time. So, what does that mean? Well, the moon is moving into the second half of Scorpio, so that means it is out of the Via Combusta. And it may well be the case that with the moon moving out of the Via Combusta, that at some level things are calming down somewhat. We've just had this huge conjunction between the Sun, Venus and Mars, really close to each other. And I think that this conjunction, could have been quite disruptive. If you looked at my video a couple of days ago, I was talking about the weekend, perhaps Friday through to Sunday, as being a time of great danger. Well, I'm making this recording on Sunday morning, so the weekend is kind of not quite over. But so far, certainly things are tense. We just had that shooting in Minneapolis by the ICE agents shot, what's her name, Renee Good, and that's causing protests. So that's one aspect of what is going on, and quite possibly these protests are fueled by the fact that you've got all these planets in Capricorn. You've got Mars pretty strong at the moment. You've got Mars opposition Jupiter. So things are really hotting up, and of course you've got Iran. So perhaps the weekend has been quite dramatic, but so far we have not seen any particular event. And of course I'm making this video on Sunday morning, so I'm still thinking there might be some event that really makes us stand back and say, well, that was serious. But it's true that things are indeed hotting up. So as far as the moon and how this relates to the moon, well, yeah, the moon is moving out of the Via Combusta. So maybe when the moon moves out of the Via Combusta, things might calm down to some extent. So that is a possibility. And then the moon having moved out of the Via Combusta, moves on, and it makes a sextile to Mercury. So that sextile to Mercury is quite possibly the main lunar aspect of the day. I mean, the moon does make a trine to the North Node at the beginning of the day, and right at the end of the day, the moon is making a trine to Jupiter. as it moves towards the end of Scorpio. That moon trine Jupiter is something that you're probably going to feel the most if you're in the Americas, perhaps late in the day if you're in Europe. So there's not actually a huge amount going on in terms of exact aspects, but we just shouldn't forget that we've got these non-exact aspects which are still pretty strong, like the fact that we have got this conjunction between Sun, Mars and Venus. It's still opposition Jupiter. So the weekend's activity, the weekend's energy might spill into the beginning of the new week. And we have Sun square Chiron. So here's the Sun at 22 degrees Capricorn, and it is making a square to Chiron. And Mars is also making a square to Chiron. So tomorrow, Tuesday, Mars makes the exact square to Chiron. Today, the Sun is making a square to Chiron, and in fact, Venus has just finished making a square to Chiron. So really, we should have brought these three planets in terms of Chiron and what Chiron is doing. So I did say in this video, your Chiron rebellion. I mean, my argument would be that the Sun is in Capricorn. The Sun is in a Saturn-ruled sign, and you think about the Sun in Capricorn as wanting to do things in quite a methodical way, and perhaps paying attention to the details and making sure things are done properly. But there is something challenging the Sun, and what is challenging the Sun? Well, Chiron is challenging the Sun, and it's easy to think about Chiron as the wounded healer, and to talk about perhaps, or think about the negative side of Chiron, the fact that one has a wound, and you can think about it in terms of therapy and healing and that passive side of it. But there is also the rebellious side of Chiron, and I think that the rebellious side of Chiron is sometimes underestimated. Chiron does like to do things differently, and it does like to do things its way, my way. And if one of the charts I'll be looking at is the chart of Sid Vicious. So if you think about my way, I know one normally associates Frank Sinatra with that song, but I think in terms of the critics and what people think is the best version of My Way, there is a view that the best version of My Way was done by Sid Vicious. You can see it on YouTube. I don't need to provide the link. And I think if you look at Sid Vicious's performance of My Way, Sid Vicious, of course, famously of the Sex Pistols. He died of a heroin overdose in the late 1970s. But he did it his way, and there may be a Chiron feel there, but I'll be talking about those kind of issues at the end of the video. So yeah, we have to perhaps do things our way, and it's not necessarily a time to be taking things at face value. And if we have a view, if we want to do things our way, then perhaps we should. And it's also maybe about honoring Chiron, and this is something I will be talking about. All of these planets, they want attention, and if they don't get attention, well, what happens? There might be trouble. Again, that's something that needs to be discussed later in the video. But for the moment, I will just regard Sun square Chiron, Sun in Aries, Sun in Capricorn, square Chiron in Capricorn, as just another of the aspects taking place over the course of the day. But probably we should see that Sun square Chiron as part of a broader aspect of the fact that we've got these three planets in Capricorn: Sun, Venus, Mars, and all squaring Capricorn. And tomorrow, Tuesday, we got Mars square Chiron. So that's why I talk about those 2 days in the thumbnail. It's not just Monday the 12th, it's also Tuesday the 13th. So that's some of the stuff going on today, set for New York. We can look at the chart from the perspective of Sydney, Australia. So here it is. So Sydney, Australia at noon, the moon is at 7 degrees Scorpio at midday. So that does mean if you are in Australia and New Zealand, the moon is going to be in the Via Combusta throughout the day. And so, I mean, I say the normal things about the Via Combusta. You know, things can happen that weren't necessarily expected. And by and large, moon in the Via Combusta in the Scorpio side of it, first half of Scorpio rather than the last half of Libra, it's probably more difficult. And I think that the moon in the Via Combusta, you know, feeds into the fact that you know, we've got planets, you know, opposition Jupiter, and we've got still got, you know, Sun Mars conjunction, and we've got well, we've kind of got a bit of a T-square there, haven't we? You know, with the Sun opposition Jupiter square Chiron, and so I think if there is a difference between the experience in Australasia compared with the difference in say the Americas, things might be just ever so slightly less stable. But you know, it's just a matter of degree, and I don't think the difference is huge. And then there is the heliocentric picture, so putting things with the sun at the center of the solar system. And you know, the sun is at 22 degrees Cancer. Remember this? Sorry, yeah, the Earth is at 22 degrees Cancer. The Earth is always going to be opposition the geocentric sun. So the Earth at 22 degrees Cancer has just passed the opposition with Mars, and so with Earth opposition Mars, and it's pretty close to the conjunction of Jupiter, it may well be that, you know, today represents, you know, a bit of a continuation of a weekend. The weekend was really perhaps the eye of the storm, but Monday, you know, still Earth is conjunct Jupiter and Earth is opposition Mars. You know, I sort of gave warnings about those aspects and the kind of impact, you know, they might have. Also, another thing that's been going on, I haven't really been following in the news, is there have apparently been huge fires in Australia. So with those aspects, it just could be a continuation, and we shouldn't assume that everything is going to be cool and calm and things are necessarily going to be getting back to normal straight away. And so there is a lot of tension around. You know, we are feeling it. It's there. And talking about Chiron, we have a heliocentric Venus square Chiron, and we just had the geocentric square between Venus and Chiron. Now we've got it heliocentrically, and so with Venus square Chiron, yeah, we might want to do things differently. We might want to be ever so slightly disruptive in terms of how we get on with people, because, you know, Venus is a planet of relationships. It's also a planet of art. So if you think about art and what we're creating, then some of us might feel this is an opportunity to create something which is different, which stands out, which is challenging, which might even be rebellious. And all of us can be artists. Just because we're not professional artists doesn't mean that our art cannot be impressive. You know, there are many ways of being artistic. Perhaps one can be artistic in the way one talks, in the way one dresses, and in the way just one is, the overall image that one presents. So that's, you know, another good reason why we need to, you know, focus on our own rebellion. It's not really a time to be entirely following the line and for conforming. So now I want to look at things from a perspective of the 12 signs. So this time round, I'm looking at my computer and I'm making absolutely sure that I am recording what I'm saying, because in my video for the for the weekend, where I was going to do 12 signs. So, I was just talking for an hour and nothing. I mean, nothing was being recorded. I mean, that is really depressing. It really is. I mean, trying my hardest to do my forecast of the 12 signs, nearly over, getting to Capricorn, and I noticed nothing is being recorded. I was just speaking into the ether for my own amusement. But this time round, I am recording. So these are my forecasts for today, which is Monday, January the 12th, 2026, for the 12 signs. Aries. The big aspect today is a square between the Sun and Chiron. I think that this aspect, could be important, and arguably, you should see this square between the Sun and Chiron as being part of a wider configuration, because tomorrow, Tuesday, you've got Mars square Chiron, and you shouldn't forget that Chiron is in Aries, and with Chiron in Aries, you might be tempted to look at this in a negative way. So Chiron is sometimes seen as the wounded healer, and so with Chiron going through Aries, you might say, well, you've got to deal with your wounds and all the things that are troubling you, things have happened in the past. That may or may not be true, but I think that what matters is your response, assuming these wounds exist. There don't have to be any wounds. Chiron can be something else, and I strongly argue, that Chiron is about rebellion, and the fact that Chiron is square your Sun and the Mars is really telling you that you've got to think outside the box. I mean, you think about what it is that Sun and Mars are about. Sun and Mars are in Capricorn. That is saying something about your self-expression, and so part of you, Aries, would like to do things in a fairly straightforward way. In fact, that in many respects is the right approach. It's thinking about what you need to do, your ambitions, making an impact. And if you're making an impact in the world, like it or not, very often one has to fit in. Doesn't matter. You so often have to fit in. It's like when you look at celebrities, and people think that celebrities are these very special people, and I don't know whether they're comedians or actors or TV personalities, but what is it that makes a celebrity a celebrity? And I've asked myself this question, and okay, sometimes you're dealing with pure genius. Someone is such a genius that they just cannot be ignored. But I think that the fundamental requirement is surely to be able to fit in. Sure, you've got to be an extrovert, but you've got to be able to fit in as well. Because if you can't fit in, society is not going to deal with you. And so there is a temptation here, perhaps, to fit in, even if you're not a celebrity, whoever you are. Fitting in is such an important part of being successful. And this might be something that is maybe troubling you. You have to fit in to some extent. And perhaps with Sun in Capricorn, and particularly Mars in Capricorn, you're thinking about this. But then Chiron comes along. And this is perhaps, what I mean by the rebellious side of it. Chiron in your sign is asking you to be different and to stand out. Now, that may or may not be connected with wounds. Sometimes it is a wound from the past that encourages us to be different, encourages you, Aries, to be different. You can't just accept things as they are. And I think that perhaps the challenge here with the Sun square Chiron is to make an impact, to accept that you have a role in society, and that role could take many forms, including your career. particularly if your career involves interaction with other people. And even if you're not working, you have an impact. You're trying to make an impression, and it is easy to fit in. That's a safe approach. But Chiron is saying no, that's not enough. You have to be very clear about how you're going to do things. You have to do things your way, and in the process, you might have to be a rebel. And now you might think that if you are a rebel, that might compromise you. But it's not going to compromise you at all, because you are being completely true to yourself. And if you like, you are sort of tuning into the Chiron energy. And so maybe it's about honoring this planet. It's a minor planet. It's a planet that until I started doing these videos, I completely ignored. I actually had disdain for Chiron before I did these videos. But somehow Chiron has grown on me. So that is a way of looking at this Sun square Chiron, and it's perhaps quite an intense and personal process, because at the moment, we've got the moon in Scorpio, and the moon in Scorpio is indeed intense, Aries, and there are things that you want to really get into, and you don't want to do things superficially with the moon in Scorpio. And kind of that fits in with the Sun square Chiron. You have to be yourself, and it's existential. If you are just doing what other people say, doing what other people want, it's going to be fundamentally unsatisfactory. And in terms of how you communicate, you need to communicate from the heart, and it's not just about pleasantries. And so Aries, overall, this day is quite powerful. I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be easy, but I think that you're going to really have a strong sense of yourself and what you actually can do. Taurus. Right now, Taurus, we have the moon, in the middle of Scorpio, and Scorpio is, of course, your opposite sign. And so, with the moon in the middle of Scorpio, it might just feel that there are people that cannot be entirely avoided. You know that. And perhaps additionally, there are a few things that need to be tidied up. Over the weekend, we had a last quarter moon, and with this last quarter moon, Taurus, you might have felt that something was perhaps slowly coming to an end, and that something had to be resolved. And now that the moon is in Taurus, now that the moon is in Scorpio, you're getting some idea about what that is, what that's all about. And at times, other people can be difficult. Perhaps particularly during the first part of the day when the moon is in the Via Combuster. So, moon in the Via Combuster can potentially create a few problems. You can't necessarily take it for granted how another person is going to behave. And as a Taurus, if someone is behaving in a way that you hadn't accounted for, then that might make you upset or certainly defensive. And so, I think it's important, Taurus, that you give other people a chance to be themselves, and you don't get offended if someone does something that you weren't necessarily expecting. So that is a way of approaching the world, and don't feel that you have to do everything on your own. At least pay attention to what other people are doing, what other people are suggesting, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to follow their lead. Now, the main aspect of the day, or perhaps set of aspects involves Chiron. It's certainly Sun square Chiron happens today. Over the weekend, we had Venus square Chiron. And, Venus is moving away from that square to Chiron, but it's still happening. It's still with you. And so Chiron is potentially a disruptive force. And it's in Aries, and so you might not always be consciously aware of it. But Chiron is sort of working in the background. Perhaps pointing things out that you don't want to know. So how would that work? It might be you're unconscious. It might be that you're feeling just not entirely happy about something. Things look absolutely fine on the surface, but then on the other hand, you look at them again and it's just something wrong. And we may be talking about, your ideas. It's always good to have a set of principles that you follow. And especially now with all those planets in Capricorn. So Taurus, you might be sort of believing that you have got everything sorted out, that you know where you stand on perhaps the main issues of the day. You know where you stand in terms of, what you believe in, maybe your relationship to religion or your spirituality or whatever it is. But Chiron is kind of saying, no, not necessarily. There's something you've missed out. And Chiron, of course, would symbolize just another part of your personality. It's not some external force. It's something that is just telling you you haven't got it sorted out. You thought it was going to be easy. You thought that you were going to be able to connect everything, but there's still one thing that you have not been able to connect. Maybe it's more than one thing. And with Chiron square Venus, you kind of know, if you're honest with yourself, that things don't entirely add up, and that if you take an exception, when I say an exception, I'm talking about an exception perhaps to some broad system that you've created for yourself. There is an exception, something that doesn't make sense. And if something doesn't make sense and you really look at it, you might then realize that something else doesn't make sense. And that creates potentially a chain reaction. And so there is perhaps a challenge here to some of your beliefs. Some of your beliefs don't necessarily fit in with the reality. And when I talk about reality, I'm talking about your reality. I'm not talking about anyone else's, because there is always a high level of subjectivity. I mean, there's certainly subjectivity in astrology, but there's subjectivity in life, and finding the truth is pretty much impossible. Okay, there are certain things which are true. 2 + 2 = 4, but most of the time there are things where one person's truth is just so different from someone else's, and that's what you need to accept, and also accept that your current understanding of the truth may not be perfect. So that could be something that you need to work on, and in the process, with the moon in Taurus in your opposite sign, do pay attention to what people are doing. And it could be that they are part of the challenge, that when you look at what other people believe in and what other people are expressing, it's just doesn't quite accord with who you are. And that should be welcome, because I think that there is a possibility of real growth and being able to understand things at a new level. And when you understand something, when you get it, you'll then be in a position when you can take some kind of action. I know that with the moon in Taurus, you might think that it's all about waiting for another person, seeing what another person has to do or say or whatever, but that's not the whole picture. And with these Chiron aspects, with Venus still making a square to Chiron, it might well be the case that some of your ideas that have been building up over time are just inadequate, and maybe you need to be a rebel, and perhaps consider a view of a world which is not in accord with society around you, and so you might have to stand out for what you believe in, and even say something about your own beliefs which just don't fit the wider narrative or don't appear to fit it. So it is a time for for all of us to be individuals. Sure, we've got to accept what other people are doing, what other people are saying, but we can't just take things at face value. And just because we think we've sorted out everything doesn't mean that that is necessarily the case. Gemini, you're able to take pleasure and benefit from many different things at the moment. You kind of have a slightly different view, and what's a problem for one person, may be an advantage for another. What do they talk about? One person's poison is another person's what's the rest of it? Is another person's medicine? No, I've lost the phrase. But whatever upsets people, most other people, doesn't necessarily upset you. And you may have the ability to operate in areas that other people just can't deal with. And maybe it's because you're prepared to ask, important questions, and questions that no one else is prepared to consider. They don't want to go down that road, but you are prepared to go down that road. And the question is, how do you do that without potentially damaging yourself? Well, you just do it slowly. That's a way to do it. You have to make sure, whatever you're doing, that there is a way out. So you attempt, for example, a difficult task, and you just go as far as you can, and then you just make sure it's always reversible. And this can relate to anything. It can relate, for example, I don't know, to fixing a light in your car, your front headlamp in your car. It can be a surprisingly complicated, and sometimes you need help. But you follow the instructions, you follow the YouTube video, and you just go as far as you can while it's reversible. When it's no longer reversible, when you can't do it anymore, you stop just before it becomes irreversible, just so that you can put it back to what it was. And you take that approach, and that works fine. You know when to stop, and maybe you're able to go the whole way. And this slightly experimental approach that you're able to take may work to your advantage. And it could be that there are just difficult situations which other people at least find difficult, but you just have no problems with at all. And it's possible that in certain cases, Gemini, that you can actually benefit from other people's problems. I mean, it's not like they're suffering and you're able to benefit the more they suffer. But if you can sort something out and no one else can, well, that does give you an advantage. And it's not necessarily because you're super inspired. It's just because right now you've got the resilience to just see it through, and you can see it through perhaps to a successful conclusion. Additionally, Gemini, you may be able to take things which on the surface seem unattractive, unpleasant, not worth bothering with. You can take them and you can transform them into something that is really very useful. And and overall, Gemini, your intelligence is higher than usual. And of course, I'm a Gemini, and I like to think that I'm wonderfully intelligent. I mean, my own intelligence has been declining probably since the age of about 12. I think 12 was probably my peak intelligence. I remember having an IQ test at school when I was 11. I had this IQ test and I know I did really well. The headmaster responded to it in a very extreme kind of way. I know, but then also know that I've had IQ tests. By the time I was taking IQ tests at 13, my performance was just merely average or worse than average, and by the time I was 15, I was being told that I remember I took a test for reasoning when I was 15, and I got an E on his test for reasoning. So yeah, my peak intelligence was when I was about 11, and there was a rapid decline through my teens. But still, Geminis do like to regard themselves as being intelligent, and with the moon making a sextile to Mercury, that should give a boost to your intelligence. But it's the kind of intelligence that isn't necessarily very inspired. It's just taking things one step at a time, using what you can see, focusing on the details, and perhaps you're just seeing things that other people miss, and perhaps it's not just about intelligence, it's about being very thorough and using what you can see, using your memories, and just getting it all together. And additionally, being prepared to put in the work. So there's a lot you can accomplish at the moment if you just give yourself the chance. And you really should not take things at face value. That's why I was saying that you can take something that other people find to be difficult, problematic, even frightening, and you can take them and not be overwhelmed by them. Just taking it all in your stride, and you do it and you fix it. And so this cleverness is very much with you, Gemini, but it's a cleverness that right now comes from persistence. It doesn't necessarily come from, for example, sheer genius. So that is certainly a fortunate aspect to what's going on today. I think that so that's certainly good, and it's important not to underestimate yourself. You might overthink things, but you can simplify things, and so whatever appears to be difficult really can be very, very straightforward. Now there is a square between the Sun and Chiron today, and that is, if you like, the headline aspect. I'm not saying that this aspect is necessarily going to have a direct impact upon you. I mean, Mercury will make a square to Chiron pretty soon, but that's not with you right now. And with Sun square Chiron, you may have the ability to just pick up on what other people are experiencing. It might be your friends, for example, people you don't necessarily know very well, but you just have this sort of intuition that something isn't quite right. Again, it's not something that's not quite right with you. It may be something that's not quite right with another person. And sometimes Geminis can be dismissive of their own intuitions or their own sensitivity. You feel that something is going on with another person. You feel perhaps that they are wounded, and it's just in the things they say. It's in their body language. It's in these subtle things that you're becoming aware of. And if you get that kind of feeling, then it's probably right. You've probably made an accurate assessment of another person's state of mind. And then there is a question of what do you do about it? Can you do anything about it? And I think you give it a go. But when you're dealing with emotions and other people's emotions, it can be difficult, because you do still wonder whether you've got it right. I mean, I think you have got it right, but just because you understand something, just because you know something about another person, doesn't necessarily mean that you should intervene. Or if you are going to intervene, I think a high level of subtlety may be important. Cancer. Things are looking okay. I think it seems to be, a reasonable day. I mean, you find that, overall things are moving pretty well, pretty satisfactorily, and you feel good about yourself and your prospects and your capabilities, because right now, Cancer, there is a lot you can do, and it's all very straightforward. It's all very easy, and you're helped by the fact that the moon is in Scorpio. The moon is making a sextile to Mercury, and it's making a trine to Jupiter. Now, that trine to Jupiter isn't going to be until tomorrow, I don't think, but it's still an important aspect, and it's getting stronger as the day progresses. And so, moon trine Jupiter, that's an aspect to enjoy. With Jupiter being in Cancer, in Jupiter in your sign, and so what is there to worry about? And I think it's very important, Cancer, to be thinking about your own agency, the ability to do things as a free agent, not to have to worry about what other people are saying, what other people are doing. Okay, I do understand that there are 4 planets in Capricorn in your opposite sign, and with these 4 planets in Capricorn, you might have recently felt that you didn't have much agency because you had to deal with other people, and these other people, they could have been people in your immediate environment. It could have just been the sheer weight of the society in which you are living, and so that could not necessarily be avoided in the past. But freedom does matter, and you do have freedom, and the question is, how are you free? What actually gives you freedom? I think part of that freedom comes from the fact that the moon is in Scorpio. Moon in Scorpio, a lot of people can't handle moon in Scorpio. You can, and moon in Scorpio is very stubborn. It's very focused, and also for you, Cancer, it just wants to enjoy itself. It wants to be itself. It wants to be creative in whatever way it sees fit. And the moon is making a sextile to Mercury, and then the moon will make sextiles to Venus, Sun, and Mars. Over the next day, and those sextiles are great, and so this means perhaps that people who were a problem can actually be a plus in your life, and you just know how to deal with them. And Scorpios are very good at dealing with people in general because of the natural sensitivity that comes with your sign. Now, one aspect that we do have today is Sun square Chiron, and Chiron will tomorrow, Tuesday, Mars will be square Chiron. And Chiron is in Aries. It's been in Aries for some time. It's in a cardinal sign, and this Chiron can say a couple of things. And it might say something about career. Of course, I understand that not all of you have a career. You might have retired. You might have been thinking about something else. I don't know. But in terms of direction, well, everyone's got a direction. But Chiron in Aries might be feeling that in the past things haven't always gone right. There might additionally be a certain sense of unfairness if you're working. Perhaps you were denied something, you weren't given an opportunity, and that might be getting to you, but you don't want to completely dwell in the past. I mean, that is a Cancerian thing. It can be a Cancerian thing to be overly focused on the past. And, with Chiron in Aries, you need to accept what has happened in the past, but now you need to think about the future, because there is an active side to Chiron, and Chiron is the rebel. It can be a rebel, can be the maverick. That's very often people call Chiron the maverick. It's about doing something differently and projecting yourself in a different and individualistic way, and not caring too much about the external reaction. People may or may not be upset by what you're doing. Now, they could be upset. I mean, Sun is in Capricorn. It's in your opposite sign. So Sun and Mars is in Capricorn as well. So that the Sun and Mars and Venus is so a lot of Capricorn planets. But you can't give in to everyone all the time, and sometimes you have to take a stand. And it could be that this Sun square Chiron is Cancer about you taking a stand with particular reference to your ambitions and perhaps your work, the whole way you want to move forward with your life. Sometimes you have to be an individual. You can't necessarily placate everyone all the time. Indeed, you should not placate everyone all the time. And sometimes you have to almost sort of declare a rebellion. And rebellion perhaps is a theme of Chiron. I would argue that it is. And you're basically saying, well, the past is the past, and that's all very well, but it's now time to move on and to assert your identity. Because if you don't assert your identity now, when are you going to do it? And Chiron wants attention. I mean, it really does require attention if you're Chiron. I mean, you put yourself in Chiron's position. I mean, Chiron is a minor planet. It doesn't always get enough attention, for example, by me. And Chiron sometimes says, no, I want to be heard. And so as far as you're concerned, what does that mean? It's saying, well, it wants to be heard, and it wants to be acted on. But it's all for the benefit. It's not the benefit of you. It's not like some external spirit trying to mess things up for you. Or one could take things further and see it in terms of possession. Or no, Chiron is just symbolic of something in you that wants to be different, that needs to be different, and with particular reference to your work. But it can just be about everything that you are, everything that you're trying to move forward with. Leo. The Sun continues moving through Capricorn. I mean, it's not going to be in Capricorn for much longer. I mean, it's now at, 22, 23 degrees of the sign. So, sooner or later, just over a week, the Sun will move into Aquarius, and that will create new opportunities and challenges. But at the moment, with the Sun in Capricorn, I think that you want things done in a particular way, and additionally you're very aware of the pressures upon you. There are pressures to conform, and there are pressures to do things in a prescribed and particular way. You may be you do things by the book, and you don't move too far from the script, and there's certainly an advantage of that. I mean, if you try to make up your own rules or make up your own instructions, things quickly could go wrong. But they needn't go wrong, and they shouldn't go wrong. And right now, Capricorn, you have Leo. Right now, Leo, you have a lot of opportunity, a lot of things that you could be doing, and you could be doing things right. And also, I think that you have quite a lot of luck at the moment. You might not think you're lucky. You might think that everything is just difficult and drawn out. But if you give things your best shot, Leo, then I think that you'll find that very soon things will start moving your way, and additionally that you'll find also that other people are accommodating. At the moment, Leo, it's been a situation going on for weeks. At the moment, Leo, you are someone who can get attention, can get favourable attention, and you just have just a natural charisma, and also the luck is all around you. You perhaps come over as being someone who can be fortunate, and some people might pick up on that. Why would they not want to be close to you? Because you might be almost sort of a beacon of hope. There's an opportunity here, there are possibilities, and that's something you can project. And while it's true that you can sort out your own life, or go a long way towards sorting out your own life, then you can perhaps help other people as well. But sometimes you can get too caught up in the way things are supposed to be. You can get caught up in the rules and convention, and you then have to think again. And one aspect we've got today, perhaps an important aspect, is a square between the Sun and Chiron. So the Sun is your ruler. It is square Chiron. The square is a challenging aspect. So if you've got Sun square Chiron, it might mean that your nice, neat way of doing things may be all well and good, but it's not quite up to scratch. You need to go further. And Chiron is perhaps encouraging you to use your imagination. And you might not feel comfortable with that. Because, if you think about Chiron, Chiron is the only planet, and it's not even a planet, it's a minor planet. It's the only body in a fire sign. So it's very distant, and that fire and that inspiration may not be immediately available, but you can feel it. You can feel that something is kind of tapping on the door, asking you to go further. It's saying that the way you have been organizing your life is fine. You've done a good job, but it simply is not. It's not taking you all the way. And Chiron is just reminding you of perhaps something else. It's asking you to be imaginative at the very least, but perhaps it's going further. It's asking you to have the vision to go beyond the regulations and rules that you perhaps have been following. Yeah, maybe it's asking you to question or even rebel. So that's something that you don't necessarily want to do, but that's a challenge. Sun square Chiron. You have to go above and beyond. You have to consider different ways of doing things, and if you can take that approach, I'm not asking you. Sorry, Chiron is not asking you to destroy yourself or to totally destroy structures and routines that have been working for years. It's not quite like that, but it's just telling you that on its own, these structures and routines are not going to entirely work. You have to take things further. You have to be imaginative, and you have to be aware of new possibilities. And when you become aware of new possibilities, you then see that the way you've been organizing things in the past is not quite good enough. So I think that the Sun square Chiron could be challenging, but I think it's very useful. And maybe it's not really about overturning your structures and your routines and the way you're organizing your life, but instead it's about accommodating them and making changes, creating a situation where you can go further, where you're not stuck. Because what you don't want is, it's like buying a computer where you can't expand the RAM. You don't want a structure which can't be built up on. You want to have a structure that can always be improved on. And with this Chiron square Sun, that's perhaps what it's encouraging you to do. It's not like you have to make immediate and dramatic changes, but you have to just consider the possibility that things could go further. And in the process, you are perhaps preparing for some kind of rebellion, doing things differently, being prepared to take on something new, which in the end might turn out to be quite disruptive. Virgo, you're able to deal at the moment with quite a lot. You might not think that is the case, but right now you do have a certain flexibility, and you're not going to be too constrained by the past. So, when I say the past, I'm saying, well, there could have been things which didn't work in the past. You learned that it was all a waste of time, so you weren't going to bother too much in the future or in the present. No, it's not like that. You're able to take things at face value, and you're able to live in the present, and you're able to work with what you have. And Virgo, there could be things that you have to deal with, or at least things that you're presented with, which on the surface don't seem very pleasant, and maybe other people don't want to touch them with a barge pole. But you, Virgo, are able to be reasonable. You can see possibilities, and just because something looks ugly or unpleasant, it doesn't mean that it can't be useful, doesn't mean that it can't be transformed into something else. So in many respects, Virgo, you're pretty open-minded at the moment. You're able to see possibilities that just many other people just can't see. And in the process, you've got persistence. So if something doesn't work to begin with, you're prepared to keep going with it and try something new, try a different configuration, and you keep trying. And in the end, I think that there's a good chance that you will be successful. And you're going to be helped by the fact that the moon is making a sextile to Mercury. Mercury is, of course, your ruler. And, with this moon sextile Mercury, it could be quite inventive. Inventive because you are persistent. So you've got a problem, something doesn't work, and for some reason you're prepared to try another approach and another approach, and you're able to keep going. And that's perhaps the advantage of Moon in Scorpio. Moon in Scorpio, once it's decided to do something, once it's made a commitment, it does pursue things till the very end. So if today you're faced with something that doesn't appear to be working, you try one thing and you try another thing, it's still not working, whatever it is, maybe it's a piece of machinery, maybe you're trying to organize something and you don't necessarily get much enthusiasm, and there's always a reason why it can't be done, but if you keep going in a way that is perhaps quite plodding, it's not necessarily about anything wonderfully exciting happening. It's just about you just being ready to just see things through. Then anything can happen. And when I say anything can happen, I do mean that in a fortunate sense. It really is possible. And so that's why it's important that you don't doubt yourself, and that you're able to take your creativity to the next step. And creativity, as every Virgo knows, it's not just about genius or something you're born with. It's something you have to work on, and you have to really think about what is the source of this creativity, and how is that creativity going to be challenged. And we do have a square aspect between the Sun and Chiron today, and this Sun-Chiron aspect is encouraging you to take things further. And Chiron is working at quite a deep level. It's this sort of force working almost unconsciously, but is saying to you, yeah, you might be good, you might be talented, but you haven't taken it as far as you should. It's really encouraging you and certainly challenging you to take things further. So if today, for example, you reach a stage where you want to give up on something, you've tried your hardest, it's not working, you will know, if you're honest, that there's still another possibility. There's still another way of looking at things. And maybe it's a Chiron energy working on your behalf. It wants you to be successful. It wants you to find solutions. So, so do keep going and really understand, what you can do. And it's I think that it's this persistence that is going to really help you, and it means that you can get involved in things but other people can't deal with, perhaps because they give up because it's too difficult, or maybe they're afraid. That is possible. There are things that might be scary today. I mean, we live in scary times, but you have a kind of a matter-of-fact approach, and you're able to look at something for what it is rather than what everyone fears it might turn out to be. And because of that, you can take something that is difficult and quite intractable and turn it into something that's absolutely manageable and can certainly work in your own best interests. Libra. Venus is, or was, square Chiron over the weekend. And Venus is still square Chiron. I mean, Venus in Capricorn, square Chiron in Aries, and now of course we've got Sun square Chiron, and tomorrow we're going to have Mars square Chiron. So it's all happening, and so I'm really looking at those aspects, in general. It's not just one planet square Chiron. It's the three planets, and what does it mean for you? What does it symbolize for you? And I think, Libra, you're perhaps being encouraged to do things differently. The problem with all of these Capricorn planets for you is that they were quite intense. They were working at a level which was fairly unconscious, because we're dealing with the lowest part of the chart. Capricorn is the lowest part of the chart if we set a chart with Libra on the left, and part of you, Libra, would just like to do things your way. You don't want to do things other people's way, because it's worrying. Now it's good, of course, to do things your way, and of course one of the themes of this video is being a rebel. Chiron the rebel. But you're inclined. Part of you is inclined not to be rebellious at all. And the rebellion may, in the first instance, not come from you. It may actually come from the outside world. Because, you've got Chiron in your opposite sign. Chiron is in Aries. Now, of course, Chiron is a slow mover. It stays in Aries, for quite a long time. But, while it's in Aries, it represents perhaps an unconscious force, something you really don't want to be aware of. Perhaps you see it in other people. And so, in terms of rebellious behavior, how do you respond to others, what they are doing? And maybe it's when you look at other people's rebelliousness and the way other people are being individuals, you might find that challenging, but it should be an encouragement. Because what you're seeing in other people is something you should be seeing in yourself. And so, with Venus square Chiron, Venus is still square Chiron, that is just encouraging you to think about how things could be done differently. And if another person can do something and do it well and do it effectively, then you perhaps can follow suit. And maybe in some cases it might be about joining a rebellion. You see how other people are individuals, are expressing their individuality, and you're thinking, well, yeah, you can have some of that as well. So, don't discount what other people are doing, what other people are up to, what other people are presenting. And at the same time, remember that things are changing. Venus is moving further and further away from the Sun and Mars. So that's giving you more freedom. You're no longer constrained by that Sun-Mars conjunction. You don't have to worry so much about the pressure and the inhibitions and the worries about what might happen. Venus is making a break for it, and Venus will soon enough move into Aquarius. By the end of a week, Venus will be in Aquarius, and it will then start making a conjunction to Pluto. So that's when you can really start to do things your way, and do things your way in a manner that is really very, very constructive. And even in the short term, Libra, don't doubt your ability to create change. You can create change, and you can do it in a way that is very spontaneous. And if you don't like something, if you feel that something should be better, or if you feel that something needs to be challenged, then Libra, that is something you very much can do. So yeah, if you're not happy about something, things could always be better, and you have the ability to make them better. And that can take many forms. We have the moon's current in Scorpio, and so with the moon in Scorpio, you might be thinking about what you have and what you don't have. Scorpio being, after all, the sign following Libra. So if there's something you don't have that you want to get hold of, it might have monetary value. Then the moon in Scorpio makes a sextile to Mercury. So with moon sextile Mercury, Libra, you have a chance to think about maybe money, or the rewards you're getting, or the rewards you're not getting. You have a chance to think about it and to work out a plan, work out a solution to the problem, if it is a problem. And then tomorrow the moon goes on, or maybe even towards the end of the day, the moon goes on towards making a trine to Jupiter. And that trine to Jupiter does allow you to really state your case, and I think that you'll be able to state your case very well. And I think that you can get your way, and people are going to listen to you. You are going to have an impact. So don't ignore money. I think money shouldn't be regarded as a problem. It can actually be an area where you can really take control. Scorpio. Moon is now, obviously very much in Scorpio, very much in your sign. And the moon is making a sextile to Mercury. It's also starting to make a trine to Jupiter. So things should be moving quite well for you. You're very capable at the moment, and it doesn't have to be much of an effort. Things can happen just very naturally and spontaneously, and there's no need to worry too much about how things are unfolding. It shouldn't be about struggle. It should just be about you naturally being yourself and doing things that you want to do, and don't forget your own intelligence with moon sextile Mercury. Right now you're very versatile. You're versatile in terms of the techniques you use. I mean, your basic idea about what you want is not versatile at all. I think actually you're pretty focused, but there are many ways of achieving your goals, and you can be experimental. You can try one thing, you can try another thing, and in the process I think that you can be really very, very successful. So I think that it can be a good day, but you don't want to be complacent and one aspect we have is the Sun square Chiron. And the Sun is an important planet, and the Sun is perhaps symbolic for you, Scorpio, of where you're going, how you want to present yourself, what you understand by progress. And as far as you're concerned, maybe things have been going quite well, but you still feel that maybe it could be better, and that you haven't fully organized yourself as well as you should. And maybe it's a situation where you felt you had to fit in with other people. Other people are there, other people have to be accommodated, and you've perhaps gone too far in that direction. You can't completely accommodate everyone, because then you just sort of lose touch with who you are and who you want to be. And for a Scorpio, that is not a remotely desirable situation. So, with the Sun square Chiron that we have today, and it's not just Sun square Chiron, because tomorrow Mars is going to make a square to Chiron. In fact, Mars is pretty much exactly square Chiron at the moment. So you could say, well, it's a whole sort of Sun-Mars conjunction making a square to Chiron. And so Chiron is stirring things up for you. And it's saying that you don't have to just fit in with, for example, other people's schedules. You've got your own schedule. You've got your own ways in which you can organize things. And you might think that if you're talking about schedules and organization, that that's all very trivial. But is it trivial? Because if you change the way things are organized, one change can lead to another change, can lead to a revolution. And it may be that by changing the time you do something, maybe you do something every day at, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and you decide to do it at 1:30 instead. And that's creating a change. And it's a particularly important change if other people are involved with it. And it might be the case, Scorpio, that if you're feeling at all stuck and you're involved in a schedule involving other people, that you might actually need to deliberately change that schedule. And it's not just about a timetable. It's just what people are used to. Because people do get used to each other. They get used to each other's behavior. And when people get used to your behavior, you're up against a set of expectations, and you kind of naturally fit in with these expectations. So that means that by changing schedules, by changing expectations, you are being rebellious. And so that may be a way in which you can be rebellious. So it might be a small act of rebellion about something apparently completely trivial that does change everything. So that is a way in which you could use this Sun square Chiron. And also you've got Mars square Chiron. I'll be talking perhaps in more detail about Mars square Chiron tomorrow, because tomorrow is, of course, when the Mars square Chiron is exact. But Mars square Chiron might be saying something about how you are organizing your life, and in terms of perhaps even lifestyle, what you're eating, how you're exercising, and you've perhaps got used to doing things in a particular way, perhaps because it's socially desirable, but maybe it's just not working as well as it should, and now is a time when you need to think about real change. And looking at the broader picture, Scorpio, at the moment, Scorpio, you are fortunate, and you have a strong sense of self, and you need to honor this strong sense of self. So if you're being constrained by someone else and you're trying to be too accommodating, that's not the right approach. And maybe, Scorpio, one way around this, one way to assert yourself is to present an alternative vision. Everyone has a vision, and if you haven't got a vision, then you may be relying on someone else's vision. But if you can present a coherent vision to everyone else, then things can, very quickly change, and you can find that you are the one with the power, the one who everyone listens to. Sagittarius. So a big theme of this video is Chiron, and with Chiron, I've certainly heard of Chiron throughout my time studying astrology, and I started studying astrology in the mid-80s, and probably peak Chiron was in the 1980s. And I know people talk about Chiron a lot now, but in the 1980s, people would write books about Chiron, and I think that there was a suggestion that Chiron was the ruler of Sagittarius. So Chiron at its peak was almost challenging Jupiter for rulership of Sagittarius. I think that was what the suggestion was. Maybe it was a co-ruler, but that's what people thought. That is clearly not right. Chiron does not rule Sagittarius. I'm not even convinced that Chiron has an association with Sagittarius. But you can see why Chiron has a link with Sagittarius, or there might be a perceived link with Sagittarius, because Chiron and Sagittarius have the same symbol. You think, well, you have the archer, the centaur, and so that might have a lot to do with it. But maybe you feel a comfort with Chiron, because Chiron does give the idea of maybe taking things further, and perhaps as a Sagittarian, the idea that Chiron is a kind of sort of quite rebellious being, or certainly a rebellious planet that wants to look beyond the horizon, and perhaps wants to try sort of novel solutions to solve old problems. And so that might be how Chiron works. And so I can see why there might be a sympathy between Sagittarius and Chiron, but I don't think we should be fooled by the fact that just because they've got the same symbol, or a very similar symbol, that Chiron is the same as Sagittarius, or indeed that Chiron rules Sagittarius. Chiron does not rule Sagittarius. It's obviously Jupiter rules Sagittarius. And as far as what's going on with Chiron at the moment, Chiron is in Aries. Chiron is the only planet in a fire sign at the moment. If we treat Chiron as a planet, technically I think it's a minor planet. So Chiron carries a lot of fire. It carries all the fire on its back. Maybe that's a wound for poor Chiron. And you, Sagittarius, you're a fire sign, and you're perhaps missing the fire. And so Chiron might be especially valuable to you at the moment, and you might appreciate the challenge of Chiron, because Chiron is kind of, for you, Sagittarius, could be making things just more interesting. And Chiron is square the Sun, and the Sun is in Capricorn, and so with the Sun in Capricorn, for you, Sagittarius, it's arguably not the best place for the Sun to be, not least because it's just, perhaps from your perspective, rather boring. I'm not saying Capricorn is a boring sign, but from a Sagittarius view, you may be just forced to deal with things that you don't really want to deal with. Perhaps there are details that have to be gone through. You have to be slow and methodical. And of course, if we're talking about Capricorn, there could well be a financial angle to it all. I don't know what's going on in your life, but if you've been feeling this Sun, Mars, Venus conjunction, and of course Mercury is not too far away from this conjunction as well, it might have had a material dimension, even a financial dimension as well. But Chiron is challenging this. And I think that, what Chiron is saying at the moment, remember, Sun is square Chiron today. And so what Sun square Chiron is saying, well, you've got to go beyond. You can't just get caught on material things, even material values, thinking about the price of things. What do you need? What do you need to buy? What can't you buy? These things can drive you crazy. But with Chiron making the square to the Sun, there is a challenge, and arguably, Chiron is really part of a T square. So you've got at the moment Jupiter opposition the Capricorn planet, the Capricorn planets. You've got obviously Sun, Mars, Venus have just gone past Jupiter. Mercury is moving towards an opposition to Jupiter, and so for you, that is challenging, and it might well be about money, or it could be about power. Who has the power? We're dealing with things that are complicated, where things are sometimes being hidden, and it's all rather difficult, and a lot of people aren't being straightforward. And then Chiron is on the T. Chiron has been squaring Jupiter. Chiron has been squaring the Capricorn planets, and Chiron is now square the Sun, and it's about to square Mars. And so Chiron could be argued that Chiron is a solution. It's the key. And so you have to perhaps cut through everything, cut through all the bureaucracy, cut through the worries about money, pounds, shillings, and pence. If you're in the UK, well, no, they don't use pounds, shillings, and pence. No, we went decimal in 1971, but I don't know. Whatever it is, cutting through that and asking yourself, what is important. And of course, with Chiron in Aries, what's important is that you do things your way. That is a theme of this video, doing things your way. And you can do things your way. It's not immediately obvious. It's subtle, because Chiron is the only planet in a fire sign. But in a kind of a shadowy way, Sagittarius, you can actually see how things come together, how things should come together. And you have to kind of work almost in the darkness here, because there isn't much fire. But Chiron is there. So for you, Chiron might be a quite shadowy energy, but it's an energy that is there. And if you seek it out in the dark, you can find it, and then you can find whatever it is that you feel good about, what you feel comfortable about, and you can get in touch with your creative genius, but in a way that is very subtle. It's not obvious, but you're moving in the right direction. And with the moon moving through Scorpio, it's nothing that has to be talked about. It's nothing that's obvious, but you have to kind of just feel your way around it. And as you do that, as you get closer to this energy, then you're going to feel better about yourself, and you're going to feel better about who you are and what you can do. And don't forget Jupiter. Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius. It's not Chiron, and Jupiter is of course making an opposition to the Capricorn planets. But to be more specific, Jupiter is halfway between making an opposition to Mercury and making an opposition to Venus. So we've had a Venus opposition Jupiter. That's happened, and I've already talked about it. I suggested that Venus opposition Jupiter might be sort of quite indulgent. There are other sort of positive things to say about it. And then you're about to have Mercury opposition Jupiter. So that's in the future. Venus opposition Jupiter is in the past. Mercury opposition Jupiter is in the future. And right now, we're halfway between the two. In other words, Jupiter is currently on the Mercury-Venus midpoint. It is opposition the Mercury-Venus midpoint. And Mercury-Venus as a pair, as I frequently say, are about your abilities, perhaps your artistic abilities, just the things you do well. And Jupiter is another type of light. Okay, Jupiter's in Cancer. It may not be immediately obvious, but it's there for you. It is your ruler. It's always going to be your ruler. And so with Jupiter on a Mercury-Venus midpoint, you get the creativity. The creativity is there for you. So in a way, Chiron and Jupiter are working together to help you really, make the most of things. And you can really tune into who you are and move beyond, all of those sort of rather tedious material details. But in the process, it's not like you're doing anything stupid. You're ignoring money. There's always money has to be accepted, but instead you're moving beyond. You're integrating something into a whole, and if you are able to fully express yourself, which I think you can and you will be able to do, and don't forget, very soon the moon will move out of Scorpio into Sagittarius, and so moon in Sagittarius, I think that will be very, very welcome. So you are kind of looking for something in the shadows, and you will find it. And you're helped by Chiron and you're helped by Jupiter. And once you get a sense of who you are and what you can do, and you get a sense of your own brilliance, no one might notice that brilliance in the short term, but it doesn't matter. In the end, they will. Capricorn. Still, we've got 4 planets in Capricorn. They're not going away. And this it does mean at the moment, Capricorn, you're on great form. I think that you're appreciating the fact that the moon is in Scorpio. The moon in Scorpio is going to be making sextiles to all of these Capricorn planets. It starts today with the moon making a sextile to Mercury. Then it moves on, and sort of tomorrow the moon will make sextiles to Mars, Sun, and Venus. And so this means, Capricorn, that you're going to be able to, really present yourself very well. And when you're surrounded by people, if you get to be surrounded by people, I think you can be very effective. You really are, a hard person to ignore. I mean, it's not that you necessarily care about getting attention, but how can you be ignored? Because you have got so much to offer. And so, there's good reason to be optimistic about the way things are working. But there may be a question of, what are you ignoring? Is there anything you're ignoring? Is there something that you haven't necessarily taken seriously enough? It might relate to the past, to something that you've sort of lost a connection with. And this is perhaps where Chiron comes into play. So, the big aspect for today is Sun square Chiron. So when I was thinking about this Sun square Chiron, you think about it. It's Sun in Capricorn square Chiron in Aries. So how might one interpret Sun in Capricorn? I mean, Sun in Capricorn, you could say that's you, perhaps being a typical Capricorn, wanting to do things in a structured and orderly way, and you do it slowly, but you do it effectively. You think about Capricorn, you think about the goat climbing up the mountain, climbing up a sheer cliff. I don't know how goats manage to do it, but they do. And you're trying to be practical about it, and that's all well and good. But there's just something missing. And Chiron is square the Sun. It's also going to be square Mars tomorrow, and Mars is a planet that has an association with your sign because Mars is exalted in Capricorn. And it might just be that your current way of doing things isn't quite good enough. Perhaps it's too orderly, it's too staid, and it's not disruptive enough. And perhaps you have to be disruptive. People have got caught up in a particular narrative. They think that that narrative is the only narrative, but there are other narratives to consider. And there may be something to do with the past, something you've forgotten about in the past. And it's knocking on the door. It wants your attention. And it might be about how you organize the fundamentals of things, how you organize your home or your family. You know, Chiron in Aries is saying, well, if you haven't got the basics sorted out, then how can you really be yourself? And when I say sorted out, I mean changed. Maybe your home environment has become stifling in some respects. It's not supportive of your individuality and your creativity, and you need to create change. Maybe you need to demand change, and that might say something about how you relate to your family, even if there's no one around, even if it's just you. There's just something from the past that is quite fresh, and it's quite rebellious. Even though it's in the past, it can still be fresh. Maybe it's been held in reserve for years. Your individuality held in reserve, or at least a part of your individuality held in reserve, and now it wants to come into play. So maybe how that is how that Sun square Chiron is going to work. But it is a constructive energy, and very much so. And it might also say something about relationships, because we do have Jupiter has been aspecting the Capricorn planets. Jupiter's been making an opposition to the Capricorn planets, and that maybe hasn't always been easy. You've had to perhaps negotiate with other people. You've trying to sort of find a sort of a modus vivendi, a way of living. But yeah, there's still an issue there, and Chiron is saying, well, this is how you do it. And perhaps what needs to be changed is not your relationships with particular individuals, but what has to change is something on a more fundamental level. Because if you change the fundamentals, again, it might relate to your home, your family, to things that you regard as being the absolute bedrock of your security. You create change and you uncover new things, then you can present yourself in a new way, in a way that is more confident, and people will just naturally accept it. So, at some level, Chiron is the key here, and maybe that's, for something that you have to work out, you have to discover, and I've sort of given you some hints about how you might go about doing it. Aquarius. Still, there are no planets in air signs, and I know I've said this on numerous occasions, but I think it does matter. I mean, I know that very soon, by the end of a week, Venus will be in Aquarius, and that's going to be, a big change. But having to rely on Pluto in Aquarius, can be tough, and it is a situation here, Aquarius, where probably you don't have much scope for taking sort of individual action. There are things you would like to do on your own, and you'd like to be yourself and to make an impression, and that's what you want to do. But it's hard work, and perhaps the best way of dealing with today is to be fairly responsive, in the sense that you look at what other people are doing, you respond to what's happening, you don't initiate anything. And you might like to initiate things, but I just don't think that it would necessarily work, and maybe you have to let other people make all the effort, let them work with the challenges, and you can watch them succeed, you can watch them fail, and that might be quite informative, and that is perhaps giving you an idea of Aquarian objectivity. You don't have to be emotionally involved. It's not necessary, right now. You still have to think about your own interests. I mean, there's nothing wrong with putting yourself first, but the question is, how do you do it? I mean, the moon is making a sextile to Mercury. It's also starting to make a trine to Jupiter, and with the moon sextile Mercury, I think that you can discover loads of interesting things, loads of important things, and that's especially the case if you're working today. If you're working today, have your eyes open, watch what people are doing, listen, and I think that you might discover some things which are certainly useful. They might also be important, and then the moon is starting to make a trine to Jupiter, and with the moon making a trine to Jupiter, that means in quite a passive way you can organize things and just make sure that everything is working well. And again, you don't have to get attention. You don't necessarily have to initiate anything. You shouldn't really initiate anything right now. I mean, things will change. Of course, things will change when all those planets move into Capricorn, and then we've got Sun square Chiron. So Sun square Chiron is the big aspect of the day. It's the aspect I've chosen to really concentrate on, and this Sun square Chiron may not be about you. It may be about someone else. Someone else who is trying to work things out, and they perhaps feel they have to take a stand. Why do they have to take a stand? Because it relates to their fundamental individuality. And so Sun square Chiron can be a person who feels perhaps that they are forced to be rebellious. They're forced to perhaps dig their heels in. And so that Sun square Chiron may say something about how other people are behaving. So if someone seems to be behaving strangely, or seems to be very insistent, for example, that they are right, then you might want to challenge them. But then if you challenge them, they might really just want to take things further. They might become really obsessed with how right they are. And it is about Sun square Chiron. And if someone, if someone is wanting to be a rebel, if someone is wanting to assert themselves, ask yourself why. And in the first instance, don't necessarily ask whether it's the right thing to do or whether it's useful, because everyone needs to be heard. And it's a world in which it can be very difficult to be heard. And if people are looking for attention, and if they're doing something unusual and unexpected, it might all be all about attention. But it might also be about them, trying to discover who they are and how best to assert their individuality. And I go back to what I was saying at the beginning of this piece on Aquarius. It's not a time to be overly assertive, to feel that you have to be creative. I don't think you do. I think it's more a time for watching and trying to understand, rather than putting anything out or trying to get huge amounts of attention. Pisces. Things look pretty good, Pisces. I'm quite optimistic about today. I mean, one thing we've got today is we've got Jupiter is halfway between making an opposition to Mercury and making an opposition to opposition to, what's the other one? Opposition to Venus. So we've had Venus opposition Jupiter. That's in the past. In the future, you're going to have Mercury opposition Jupiter. So that halfway point, well, it can be conceived as Jupiter on the Mercury-Venus midpoint. So that's a way of looking at it. And Jupiter is in Cancer. It's exalted in Cancer. Jupiter is in a very creative part of your chart. And so Jupiter in Cancer on the Mercury-Venus midpoint, logically, opposition to Mercury-Venus midpoint, should logically make you really very creative. You should have, a really powerful sense of who you are and, what you can do. And you don't have to follow the crowd. But that doesn't mean to say the crowd can't be useful. So, there is this opposition. Jupiter is opposition all those Capricorn planets. So all those Capricorn planets might represent social pressure, might represent your friends, the people you have to interact with. And it does seem that they are at odds with who you are. But, in order to be creative, sometimes you have to struggle and sometimes you have to fight. If everything goes your way, if you never get any resistance, if everyone says, hey hey Pisces, do what you like, it's fine. You want some pressure. You want some resistance. I mean, that I think is essential to the creative process. And maybe you can really benefit from this pressure. You can see that, Pisces, you are this, other people are that. This is what other people want, and this is what you want. Again, you can see the potential for a clash, but that clash is constructive. It's that clash that allows you to really move things to the next level. And we've got this this opposition, and then we've got Chiron on the T. So Chiron is square Jupiter, and also Chiron is square those Capricorn planets. And today Chiron is square the Sun. Tomorrow it will be square the Mars. And so Chiron can be seen as a rebellious influence, and it's encouraging you to take a stand over anything. And so if you can take a stand, and you feel you've got the ability to take a stand, to just say you are this, you are not that, and you're not going to fit in, then it might be worth it. Of course, there's always a problem taking a stand. I mean, when you take a stand, you immediately sort of run into resistance, and people might say bad things about you. But but sometimes it is necessary. And at the moment, Pisces, with Saturn in your sign, Saturn won't be in your sign for much longer. In just over a month, it moves into Aries. But Saturn is in your sign, the North Node is in your sign. It really is a time to take on the Chiron energy and perhaps to be a maverick. And you have your own ideas about many different things. One idea that you might have a particular view about money. Now, I'm not saying that your view is necessarily right, but money might be a symbol for some Pisceans today of your individuality and your independence. Perhaps there's pressure for you to do something with money, whether it's to spend money or not to spend money, whatever that pressure is, and you might see money as an opportunity to assert your independence. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, sometimes people assert their independence by doing really stupid things with money. So that is a possibility. On the other hand, you might just say, well, this is your money and you're going to do what you like with your money. There may be pressure to give people money, lend people money, spend money on particular things, and you need to kind of hold firm. So for some Pisceans, a display of financial independence may be a way of just demonstrating your overall independence. And that's it. I've managed to get through the 12 signs, and I think they're all safely recorded. And now I want to turn my attention to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 44. And it doesn't move. No moving lines. So 44 is coming to meet. And the I Ching does not have a particularly positive view of this hexagram. It's a warning, coming to meet someone who wants to meet us, someone who wants to get our attention, someone who perhaps wants to worm their way into our confidence. And, this person could be anyone, but they want something. They want us to maybe give up some of our independence. We thought we've got everything sorted out. We're living our life, but someone turns up. They might be trying to sell something. In a sort of a relationship perspective, someone who wants to hang on to us, someone wants to get close, and they are in a hurry. They are perhaps being a bit previous. Do people still use that expression? I think it's quite an interesting expression. If someone is being a bit previous, they're kind of jumping the gun. So that might be coming to meet, and how that's working. But there is constant pressure to give up our precious independence, and it's kind of happening at the same time as Sun square Chiron and Mars square Chiron tomorrow. And I've talked about Chiron, I am talking about Chiron in this video as being about your independence, perhaps being about your Chiron rebellion, and that's what Chiron is about. Yet we've got this I Ching, which is talking about kind of the opposite. It's talking about you losing your ability to act freely. I mean, it could happen, and so that's perhaps why you need to be rebellious, because there seem to be strong conforming pressures today, which need to be resisted as much as possible. And I think, given everything, you're able to resist it, because this hexagram 44 is not saying you are going to lose your independence. It's just a warning. You could lose your independence. You agree to something. You had everything sorted out, and then you've lost it all because someone else is just, overly assertive. And with this, in terms of this moving line, in terms of this unmoving hexagram, we have a nuclear hexagram. The nuclear hexagram is clear to see because we've got 4 unbroken lines in the middle. And so that means that the nuclear hexagram is simply hexagram 1, the creative. And that's underlying the whole picture. Perhaps that's us, being the initiator. That's how it should be. That's underlying the whole thing. And so the question is, who is the initiator? Is the initiator this external force that tries to take away our independence? Or is it us reasserting our independence? And I think that's what this hexagram should be all about. Sure, there is pressure to give up our independence, to stand down in terms of our rebellion, whatever that rebellion might be. But I think that this is pressure that needs to be resisted. And now I want to finish up by looking at Chiron again, and thinking about Chiron. And so as far as Chiron is concerned, I've always had a great battle with Chiron. If you've been watching my videos for long enough, Chiron is has always been an issue for me. For a very long period, I would disdain Chiron. I mean, almost since when I first started getting into astrology. And if you're, I'm sorry to talk about my own chart first, but I think that if you're looking at an astrologer talk, you have to be aware of their subjectivity and where they're coming from. I mean, this all does link up. I mean, don't worry. I'm sorry if I'm being a little bit indulgent here, but as far as me, here's my horoscope, by the way. And the thing about my chart is that I have an exact conjunction between Jupiter and Chiron. It's a really very, very close conjunction between Jupiter and Chiron. And it's so close that I cannot distinguish between Jupiter and Chiron, because Jupiter and Chiron are the same place. So it's kind of difficult for me to really say what Chiron is in terms of my own personal experience, because Chiron is in the same place as my Jupiter. But I've thought it through, and I can kind of see how that Chiron is working, and that sort of Chiron is wanting attention. How does Chiron get attention? And so if you think about it, Chiron has just gone stationary direct, and so it's wanting more attention than usual. And right now, whereas Chiron is at Chiron is precisely at 22, around 22:39 Aries. So Chiron is still very slow, very slow. And in terms of myself, the thing I'm concerned about is my moon. So let me show you my moon. So my moon is at 22 degrees 23 Aries, and so I've got Chiron exactly conjunct my moon at the moment, and so perhaps this is why Chiron is bugging me, and Chiron is wanting attention. And of course, moon is not my sun. I mean, moon is in my chart is something quite projectable. It's a feminine energy in my horoscope. Moon in Aries described me very well, perhaps up until my early 20s, but after my early 20s, I think I sort of got more into my moon and more into my sun in Gemini. So Chiron is making its presence felt. Talking about wounds, have I had a bad wound? Well, I did hurt my foot recently. I smashed my toe. I've not been walking for the last nearly a week. It's getting better now, but this is when I smashed my toe. And so when I smashed my toe, Chiron was pretty close to the ascendant midheaven midpoint. I don't know about that exact time. I was in too much pain to notice the exact time. I was obsessing about my toe, but I've just had Chiron on my moon, and I think perhaps smashing my toe was just perhaps a reminder. Chiron was just reminding me that it was here and it needed some attention. So there is my own view on Chiron, and my evolving view on Chiron, and now I'm thinking about what does this Sun-Chiron square actually mean? So here is a chart of the exact square today, taking place today. I make it at 8:32 p.m. So there is the Sun at 22 Capricorn, right square my moon, and there's Chiron. There's Chiron square. So I'm slightly worried about this Sun-Chiron square because it hits my moon. I get it directly on tomorrow, Monday the 12th. But you're not interested in me. I don't want to be too self-indulgent. So this Sun square Chiron. I saw it as Sun in Capricorn as being something quite staid, just wanting to do things, by the book. It's Capricorn. It's an earth sign, and that's how we want to do it. And of course, I'm not just talking about you or me. I'm just talking about everyone. And Chiron in Aries is saying, no, that's not the right way of doing it. You've got to do things differently. And Chiron, don't forget, it's not just aspecting the Sun, it's also hitting Venus hitting Mars, and eventually Mercury. So I would have said that Chiron, to a great extent, is a disruptor. It's disrupting things. It's saying that you've got to do things differently, and it is demanding some kind of rebellion, because I do see Chiron as being potentially rebellious, especially in Aries. I mean, Aries is a very forthright sign. It likes to assert itself, and so I think that this is what Chiron, can do, and maybe it's asserting itself as a result of some wound. I mean, every rebellion, or not every rebellion, but very often a rebellion has at its roots some hurt, some sense of injustice, something that has happened in the past, and Chiron is just saying, this is no good. We have had enough. We are going to rebel. And so it could be that some of, at least not all of us, but some of us might be in a situation where something has happened in the past and it wasn't good. We were treated badly, but we're going to get over it. Forgive and forget. Let's just get on with our life. But now we can't forgive and forget, because we know that something has to change. It's not just about the past, it's about the future. So maybe Chiron is where the past meets the future. So in the past, you had the wounds, but in the future, you have the rebellion. And so maybe this is what this Sun square Chiron, is all about. And maybe this is what's going on, for example, in Iran. With people you could say that many people in Iran feel wounded by what has happened in since 1979. Although, to be honest, the wound goes goes back much further. Of course, it goes back to the early 50s when the United States overthrew the Mossadegh regime. They didn't elected president, but the United States and Britain wanted control of the oil, so they overthrew him. They engineered a revolution, and he was replaced with the Shah. So it does go. Certainly, Iran's wounds go back a long way, and so if you're an Iranian on the street, you should remember that it's not just the Ayatollahs that have caused you problems. It's the Americans as well, because it was the Americans that got rid of Mossadegh in the early 50s. So it does go back a long way, and it might well be where the past meets the future. And I think that with the Sun square, with the Sun and Mars square Chiron, we should be thinking about the status quo, and are we just accepting it because it's easier? And there is a place for rage and for saying that what happened in the past is unacceptable, and we need to move forward, and we need to have our own rebellion. So I think that is a way that I think we maybe should be looking at Sun square Chiron. But we all have our own personal rebellion. I can't tell you what that rebellion is. I mean, I went through the 12 signs making suggestions about what that rebellion might be, but of course I'm just looking at one sign. You have to look at your whole chart, and you have to look at what feels right for you. And it's very important, I think, not to just dwell on the negative side, just to dwell on any wounds that might have happened. Poor Sun, wounded by Chiron. It's not like that. I mean, that's just encouraging sort of helplessness and passivity. And I don't think that this is what Chiron is about. And we should remember the chart for Chiron's discovery. Chiron's. This is the chart to, when Chiron was discovered. We need to look at what was Chiron doing when it was discovered, when Charles Cowell discovered it on November the 1st, 1977. Chiron was making a very close square to Mars. Chiron in Taurus was square Mars. So if Chiron was square Mars, that says something about Chiron's operation. Chiron does have anger. There are things that annoy Chiron, and Chiron is in Taurus. Chiron is, in fact, on the degree of moon's, close to the degree of moon's exaltation at 3 degrees Taurus. And yeah, Chiron Chiron gets annoyed, and Chiron can be angry, and Chiron can, make things happen. And at the time of his discovery, Mars is in the eighth house, square Chiron in the fourth. Something that has been held back suddenly boils over, and it does indeed want action. And because Chiron is in the fourth house, that might indicate that Chiron can overthrow things at a root level. So those are a few thoughts about Sun square Chiron, at least in a theoretical way. And I just wanted to quickly look at a few charts which have Sun square Chiron, just a few events and a few people with Sun square Chiron. So, for example, a chart I look at quite often is the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. And in the Battle of Bannockburn, the Scots defeated the English, and it was an important battle in terms of Scottish history. It was a reason why Scotland was able to have a few more centuries of independence, I think, although I'm not a great expert on Scottish history. And so I don't have a time for it, but you've got the Sun in Cancer square Chiron, and you might just say that Sun square Chiron. I assume that this program is giving accurate positions for Chiron in the 14th century. I assume. I should have checked against other tables, but if those are accurate positions, you could say that Chiron is holding firm, is being rebellious, is asserting its independence, and so Chiron and independence, that might be an important theme here. Now there is a negative side of Chiron and Sun square Chiron. When we think about let's do it my way, let's just do it, and I think let's do it weren't they the last words of Gary Gilmore? So Gary Gilmore was a murderer who was executed in 1977, I think. Was it 77? Yeah, on January the 17th, 1977. And the importance of Gary Gilmore's death was that there had been a moratorium on the death penalty in the United States for a long time. And then that moratorium broke, and Gary Gilmore just didn't want to appeal anymore, and he was executed. And after Gary Gilmore's death, that let the floodgates in for the death penalty, through until the present. America uses the death penalty obviously quite frequently. And so, looking at the chart of Gary Gilmore's execution, there is an exact Sun square Chiron. Now, you might see that in terms of Gary Gilmore's attitude. I believe his last words were "let's do it," or words to that effect. He didn't care. He just wanted to die. This was his act of rebellion. He wasn't just going to just rot away in the system. That's what he wanted to do. But Sun square Chiron, and note that Chiron is in Aries, and this was actually just before Chiron was discovered. But Chiron was discovered later in the year, so that might be a way in which Chiron could work. Now, a future event which will have Sun square Chiron might be maybe the inauguration of J.D. Vance as President of the United States, which will take place on January the 20th, 2029. Certainly being a bit previous here, because there's a lot for him to get through. There's the assumption that he will be the Republican nominee, and the assumption that he will get elected. My working hypothesis is that that's the way it's going to work. I haven't really gone into the details of the astrology yet, but I think it is very likely that Vance will be the next president. This is the inauguration chart, and at the time of the inauguration, the Sun is at 0 degrees Aquarius, and Chiron is at 3 degrees Taurus. In other words, this is the Chiron return of Chiron's discovery, because Chiron was discovered in 1977, so approximately 51 years later, is that right? 29 plus 23, well, I don't know, something like that, early 50s, sometime later, Chiron will return to where it was when it was discovered. So Sun square Chiron, and remember, Sun is very important. The Sun is always at 0 degrees Aquarius when a president is inaugurated. So Sun square Chiron, this might be some kind of rebellion. Where is the rebellion coming from? Now, you could say that says something about his presidency. It could say something about J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance saying that he is his own man, stepping away from the shadow of Trump. An interesting thing about the inauguration of Vance, or whoever is inaugurated in 2029, is that the South Node will be exactly on the United States' sun. So it might well be that whoever is president of the United States or is inaugurated in 2029, it's a step back. It's a moving away from where America should be going with that South Node on the sun. But I don't want to go into that in too much detail, because this is this is not really connected with Chiron, but I think we just should be aware of what Chiron is doing. And yeah, there is a Sun square Chiron at the time of J.D. Vance's inauguration, or whoever else is inaugurated in 2029. And then a few people who have Sun square Chiron, just to get an idea of the Sun square Chiron energy. There is AOC, Alexandra. I forget. AOC, the Democrat, the young Democrat politician, and AOC has her sun at 20 degrees Libra and Chiron at 16 degrees Cancer, and I would have said that may define her quite well. I mean, she also has Mars square Chiron, so we've got a Sun-Mars conjunction at the moment, square Chiron, in the sky, and this kind of resonates with AOC's horoscope, because she's got Sun-Mars conjunction. I think that certainly says something about her, that she likes to be heard. I know a lot of you listening aren't great fans of AOC, but I mean, I think she's got an interesting chart, and she's not someone who should be underestimated, by the way. So she's got Sun Mars in Libra, a very sort of willful, clear ideas about what she wants. She's not afraid of making noise, and that might be related to her Chiron. I mean, the Chiron square her Mars and square her Sun means that there is a rebellious streak, and she wants to do things differently. I don't know what wounds she has, but I think that she with her Sun in Libra, you could say, well, Sun in Libra likes to fit in. Although people with Sun in Libra can often be very good at politics, Sun in Libra, she likes to fit in, likes to, and she will have to fit in if she wants to be successful in politics. That's what you have to do. But Chiron is a disruptor. Chiron is reminding her that she's supposed to be a rebel. She can't just fit in with what the democratic hierarchy want. Every now and then, Chiron asserts itself, and Chiron will assert itself. And of course, if she ignores Chiron and just becomes an established figure, Chiron will work against her. So she may be an example of someone who, if she wants to be successful in politics, she's got this incredibly difficult balance here. She's got to fit in to some extent, but if she doesn't honor Chiron, then Chiron will get her. I mean, Chiron will undermine her, and Chiron can work in different ways. Being different, being unusual, and the Australian what do they call it? Female impersonator. That's one aspect. Barry Humphries, when he was Dame Edna, he had all sorts of other people who I can't remember the name. I mean, I'm not a great expert on Barry Humphries, but Barry Humphries has his son, Sun square Chiron. There's Barry, well, of course he's dead now, but Barry Humphries had his son in Aquarius square Chiron. And so, Chiron here, there might be a wound here. We know that Barry Humphries, for a long time early in his career, he had an alcohol problem. I think alcohol nearly killed him in the 70s, but he got over his alcohol problem. So there is the wound there. I don't know about the healing, but Sun square Chiron is, well, Chiron is the maverick, and so perhaps that Sun square Chiron, was very important part of the way he did his comedy. And of course, with if he is sort of taking on these different roles, for example, Dame Edna and so on, perhaps in some of his roles, he's sort of taking on some of the planets in his charts, and maybe Chiron is part of it. And Sun square Chiron, George Soros, our favourite multi-millionaire, George Soros. Don't have a time of birth for him, and he has got Sun in Leo, square Chiron in Taurus. So clearly, George Soros is a rebel in a way. He likes to do things differently, and he has ideas about how he can change society by supporting various organizations. He has perhaps a globalist image associated with the kind of philosophy one associates with the World Economic Forum, but it's not about judging George Soros. It simply is the case that with his Sun square Chiron, he feels he needs to be the rebel, and he needs to overthrow things, perhaps overthrow existing structures, overthrow the things which allow individual states to maintain their integrity. And so he's got his Sun in Leo, clearly a man who has a high opinion of himself, and square Chiron, that Chiron is encouraging him to go beyond himself. It's not just about him and making loads of money. It's about him having an impact on the world. And of course, Chiron and Taurus, you could say that is quite sort of ideological. George Bush Jr. has Chiron square the Sun. In fact, he's got George Bush Jr. was born. He was elected president in the year 2000, and George Bush Jr. perhaps doesn't strike one necessarily as being rebellious. I think that there were times when he had real arguments with his father when he was a younger adult, and so he has Sun square Chiron, and he perhaps likes to do things differently. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't immediately make sense, him having Chiron square the Sun, unless you perhaps look back at his past. He was not really someone who was into the sort of consensus. Having only just won the 2000 election, when more than half the American voters voted against him. He was not really into continuing with that consensus. He was very much following a Republican agenda, and so he did it his way. You could argue with his Sun square Chiron, but maybe you have some thoughts about George Bush Jr. and whether that Sun square Chiron works. Someone who I think really did perhaps show Sun square Chiron was Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison of The Doors fame, who died in Paris in, I think, 1971, or was it 1970, 71? He was one of those people who died at the age of 27, like Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. And so he had a very close Sun square Chiron. So Sun in Sagittarius, square Chiron in Virgo. So you might say, if you want to be a rock star, if you want to do things differently, if you want to be a rebel, having Sun square Chiron can help. I believe that Jim Morrison's father was an admiral, so he had a very respectable, conservative father, and he certainly rebelled against that by getting into his music and counterculture and everything else he got into. So that might be how the Sun square Chiron works. There is another way of looking at that Sun square Chiron. You could say for Jim Morrison, Sun in Sagittarius actually was his father. I mean, I know you associate Jim Morrison with Sagittarius. He seems to be a very Sagittarian personality, but Sagittarius can have a sort of a moral view, as I emphasize, quite a lot, because Sagittarius ruled by Jupiter. That may say something about the father presenting a set of values, and Chiron is saying, no, that's not good enough. Let's be a rebel. Chiron, albeit in Virgo, is perhaps the rebellion and wanting to do things differently. And Chiron is in fact making a wide square to Mars. Now, if you've got Sun square Chiron, you could be encouraged to do something which is dramatic and self-destructive. So here is a chart of Jan Palach. Jan Palach was a Czech student who, in the wake of the Soviet tanks, not just Soviet, the whole sort of Warsaw Pact, invaded Czechoslovakia following the Prague Spring, and he was clearly very affected by it, and he has a pretty close Sun Chiron square. So what he did is he burnt himself to death, I think at the beginning of 1969. And so Sun square Chiron, Sun in Leo square Chiron in Scorpio. I know Chiron wasn't discovered when he was born, or even when he burnt himself to death. I mean, he set himself on fire, self-immolation. And this might be just him feeling he has to do something. This is an extreme manifestation of Sun square Chiron. Certainly wounded. I mean, he set himself on fire. Perhaps wounded by the fact that he'd seen his country, this nascent sort of democracy movement, smashed by the by the Soviet invasion, by the Warsaw Pact invasion. And he's got Mercury square Chiron, he's got Sun square Chiron, and so that combusted Mercury. Perhaps he couldn't really think straight, and this was his act of rebellion. But this emphasizes for him, sure, a wounded healer, but also a rebel. But his rebellion is about wounding himself so much that he dies. And finally, there is Sid Vicious. So Sid Vicious, as I was saying at the beginning of this video, one of his most famous pieces of music was My Way. That's perhaps the one song he's been associated with. Many regard My Way as his version of My Way, a very aggressive version of My Way. You can see it on YouTube. As being the best version. I believe that in the film Goodfellas, that the closing credits, this song was used as the closing credits would come. I've never seen that film Goodfellas. I know a lot of people think it's great, but so that shows that his version of My Way certainly had an impact. And Sid Vicious had. Because Sid Vicious, by the way, he was part of the Sex Pistols, and he died of a heroin overdose in the late 1970s. He had a load of wounds. I mean, his mother was a drug user, so he got very little support from his mother, and he became a drug user. There's a lot of criticism about the way his mother treated him, and particularly in relationship to drugs. And so Chiron on the IC. Okay, the IC is more about the father than the mother, but there's certainly the wound there. You can see with Chiron on the IC something about his familial background and so forth. And then the Sun in Taurus square Chiron. That is, perhaps that is the rebellion, him being a rebellious figure, becoming part of a rebellious movement. And, it's Sun in Taurus, doing it his way. And that is indeed what he did. And I think that is perhaps a good example of Chiron. And of course, in Sid Vicious's case, it's not Chiron is hitting. The Sun is conjunct the South Node. It's conjunct the North Node. Sorry, it's opposition the North Node. So Chiron is hitting the nodes as well. So this really was his way. But was it his way? Because it is the South Node. Perhaps the past. He couldn't escape from the past. We say, I said with Chiron, that Chiron is about the movement from perhaps the wounds of the past moving to the rebellion of the future. But that was perhaps something he wasn't fully able to negotiate, which explains why he died at such a young age. So that's it. That's it with Sun Square Chiron. I hope you enjoy your Chiron rebellion. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.